Welcome to this TSRGD webinar 2016. I should put those words in the other order there. It's welcome to TSRGD 2016, part 2 of a series of 2 webinars. We're actually holding another webinar now in a week or so, I think it is, Alan. And this will focus on the changes that you can see within KeySign, but particularly for those who are coming from version 17. Now, the new TSRGD 2016 obviously is a pretty compelling event that will almost certainly require your IT people to make sure that you're up to speed. I've been talking to 1 or 2 customers already starting to use version 19.1, which has been out for a week or so. So that's something that you'll may be migrating to from an earlier version of KeySign. So this is essentially part 2 then of the webinars that are really focusing on the changes in TSRGD. Those who were with me last week will recall that it was really looking at the document in itself and some of the changes there, relaxation of requirements for provision of signing. Today's webinar will be focusing a little bit more on how you implement some of the design changes. So I'll let Alan talk about that when I hand over to him. Most of you will probably know my colleague Alan Mason, who does a lot of the training for KeySign, mostly when he's available. I sometimes pick that up as well, but is also product manager for KeySign and a number of other flagship products. So he's very much the expert, having spent many years working for Manchester City Council as well. For my sins. Before I hand over to Alan, I just wanted to pick up on a couple of issues that were raised last week. We did have a good Q&A session. By the way, for all of you who have questions, do please feel free to use the questions window. That's a place where we can pick up those questions, and obviously with both myself and Alan being in attention here, if I pick up something that I think would be worth interrupting his flow for, then I will make sure that we can pick those questions up and address them as best we can. Any feedback is also good, so if you can't hear us or something isn't quite working right, then do please let us know through either the chat window, but preferably the questions window, really.
The questions window gets logged, so it's worth doing the questions through the questions window.
Now, I think Alan has actually hidden the view of ourselves now, so we can start jumping around or doing all sorts of things. But importantly, it means that your screens will be maximized. So when we look at the implementation of some of the new rules and the document itself, then you'll have a better view of that. Now, the questions that I couldn't answer directly last week, took them offline, are rather dry in their answers, so I think we may be able to put in some extra information somewhere, whether it be on a small call out on the recorded webinar or somewhere else is to come, but it does involve references to various pages and documents. So if you have one to hand, and certainly a pen if you're interested, then do please make a note of the reference that I'll give you, and I will be telling you about page numbers, so hopefully if you've got the document on hand you can flick to those. The first question that was asked was about the provision relating to the illumination, the relaxation of requirements to illuminate self-writing retro-reflective bollards. Now this is no longer necessary, which means that the products which do perform a very good service can be placed without the need for any illumination. So if you turn to page 80, this is schedule 3, and in the general directions, which is part 5, so let me just say that again, page 80, schedule 3, part 5, the general direction 2B, that is the one that relates to illumination, specifically self-writing retroreflective bollards. Perhaps, Alan, if you just be able to bring that up in your copy, you may see the way that that's structured. It is essentially an exception. Page 80 there, schedule 3, part 5, 2B. So it's an exception.
Yeah, I was looking on the table. At least you know I'm looking through the book now. So page 80,
Schedule 3, Part
Where
5.
the sign is mounted on a bollard, the bollard must be illuminated by means of internal illuminated and conform to a British standard, or in the case of a self-writing bollard, it must be illuminated by the use of retro-reflective material and conform to the British standard.
So retro-reflective material is okay there, and that last sentence that Alan read out was to be. So it's important to preface that with the B. I think that to be is the one that relaxes that and says that retro-reflective material is sufficient. There is one other place where, two places rather, in the TSRGD 16 that includes this as well, so perhaps just make a note of the references. Page 259, and that's the Schedule 11. Possibly ought to give you those in the other order because there is a temptation on 259 to look for Schedule 11, but that is a page in the schedule, and that is requirement 2, I believe. 2.
No, it says letters and numerals in the first diagram have proportions.
Okay.
So that's
So I haven't quite got that one right.
There's a it's paragraph 4, part 2 of paragraph 4.
So this is
it's not paragraph 2, it's paragraph 4.
Or we might, so
part 2 of paragraph 4, which says the subparagraph 1 does not apply to a sign mounted on self-writing bollard, which is talking about illuminating it, so it does not apply.
Now we've had some debate about what these are referenced as, whether, and I think I said general direction to be in the previous reference there, but this part 6 on page 259, it starts the previous page, but when you open the document, it's all in front of you on the open document. Now these are requirements, so one might reference this as requirement 6, or whatever it was I mentioned there. But actually the reference is subparagraph, so I think paragraph probably is the way that we will come to reference these things. But as I say, we've had some debate there.
It does seem a bit confusing because you have parts, you have paragraphs, you have schedules, and you even have subparts of parts, which so it does get quite confusing to specify these numbers.
Now we've just had a question up there saying, can we actually share the TSRG documents? I've had the same feeling actually. I wonder if Alan could just bring that up because I know probably some of you haven't taken delivery of your shiny new document, so it would be helpful just to bring those pages up for those who haven't got that.
Share so fingers crossed, something's going to come up on here.
So the first one then was page 80. Just click it, put 80 in there.
Yes, so type number 80 into there.
Now, you'll know from last week, I think, that the document has become a mixture of landscape and portrait. So once that comes up, it's probably zoomed right in. Then if you rotate that, then you'll see those coming up. So it's 2B there that hopefully you see on screen now, which is essentially an exception for self-writing bollards. The first part A there is bollards that must be illuminated with internal lighting.
But then you've got an or, and in the case of self-writing bollards, it must be use of retro-reflection material.
So the same thing then, if you go to page 259, we'll obviously not see the header as we can't in this particular case now, but on 259, if you have that to hand, then it is actually requirement 2. Sorry, I got that wrong.
So it's part 6 on 258 goes down to paragraph 4, and part 2 says the paragraph above does not apply to a sign mounted on self-writing bollards.
And then lastly, page 263. Requirement 2. Sorry, I've got that wrong again. It's general direction 1B there.
Yes, so again, it's the same as it was. So it's interesting that that's in so many parts, because you would have thought that it only needs to be stated once, but I suppose these are directions for each schedule, so it has to be mentioned in each schedule.
Yes, indeed. So that's that one. Now the next couple of things are, excuse me, are a couple of typos, incorrect references in the document. So the first one is on page 125. Now we've got that up, it'd be good for Alan to bring that up, 125. Now the text says the road marking provided for at item 10, and that's on paragraph 2 there, the road marking provided for at item 10 of the sign table in part 4, when not placed in conjunction with an upright sign, which includes the symbol at item 12 of the table in part 3 of Schedule 4. So actually there is no item 12, so if you go back to page 87 for me.
Right, so this is mistakes in the actual TSRGD that you've... Right, okay, so we're going back to what page now?
Page, page 87.
Page 87, yeah.
Then it's actually item 10 that is referenced there, because the rest of the sentence that I didn't read out in this schedule, which is part 3 of Schedule 4, prohibiting stopping on entrance markings. Item 10 there is stopping prohibited on entrance markings.
Right.
Now, I know that the person that raised this probably spent a few minutes just getting to grips with that, so we felt it would be helpful just to mention those so that you can effectively mark up your copy of the document. And the last one that's been brought to our attention by the same person kindly is on page 125 again. So this references paragraph 5 in relation to the exceptions. Just struggling now with my notes, not quite as comprehensive as they might be. It references paragraph 5 there.
Oh, so the word is paragraph. I was looking for paragraph 5, but it's a phrase, paragraph 5. So that's the mistake. So it should reference
paragraph 4, as there is no paragraph 5. So that's page 125. Paragraph 3 references paragraph 5 in the exceptions. It should be paragraph 4.
So basically all the typos are within this one page there. There's two item 12s that should be item 10, and there's this paragraph 5 that should be paragraph 4. And I'm guessing part of that's to do with the different drafts that have been over time, and the paragraphs get added and taken away and changed. So obviously the references all need updating every time they do these drafts, and I'm guessing there are a couple that slip through the net.
So if any of you spot any more of these, then do please feed it back to us. I think it's good if we have a sort of central point of contact for the DFT. They possibly are aware of these anyway, but rather than contacting them directly, we can pick these up for them on their behalf, on your behalf for the DFT, and we'll be talking about them in the user group if we have an opportunity. If, Alan, you could just bring up the PowerPoint again, then the last thing I just wanted to raise, we've had some news in the last few days that the working drawings have been reorganized. So many of you, I'm sure, will be aware of the Working Drawings website.
So I'll click on that link, and then I'll have to share that when it pops.
It's really
tidy. Okay, so hopefully that hasn't popped up.
So what I was just going to say is that the working drawings have been reorganised, and when we've got that up in view, then obviously you can see how that works. But the link, I'm sure we haven't given you time to write that down. So the good news is that you have a link within eSign actually that takes you directly to the working drawings page. Even though the page reference has changed, there is a redirection on the government website there that will take you direct to this. We'll be updating our redirection so everything connects properly, but it isn't broken at the moment. Now, the best way to get to this, if you haven't got eSign open, you want to find a working drawing, then you can simply do a search in Google for DFT working drawings, and that does seem to make this page appear top of the list. So just to quickly say on that before I hand over formally to Alan for the main presentation, is that you can see that the PDFs that are available for each of the diagram numbers have been renamed in terms of the links that you see on the page there. So we've got Schedule 02, Part 02, Item 01, and kindly in brackets they put the old diagram number there, the one that perhaps they would reference as the old diagram number, as I have just done, but is the number that I'm sure we will continue to reference. But it's useful to have that reference there with the schedules, and that obviously ties up with TSRGD 16.
So the working drawing there hasn't been renamed. It is still working drawing 521, but clearly that came, instead of coming from a link that used to say working drawing 521, now it's now working drawing schedule 02, part 02, item 16, brackets P521.
Very useful to have that referencing from TSRGD 16 through to these working drawings. So with that, I will hand over formally to Alan. He's just going to go back to share the PowerPoint slides. A few items just to raise there through that before we have a look at some of the design issues going forward.
Okay, so at this point I'm going to take over, and I was going to try and give you an outline of how we were going to run today. I wanted to just spend a few minutes going a bit further than Will went last week when he was talking about the different changes and bits and pieces in the TSRGD, and just mention the way it's tabular and what's gone into it and the way the directions have moved around, the regulations have moved around within the TSRGD. And obviously one of the things I was then going to move on to was show you the building block approach with some parking signs. Will last week showed you a building block approach with some of the other signs within TSRGD. I just wanted to work through a worked example to do with the parking signs. And then at that point, I'm hopefully going to go across and use key sign and actually show you how some of these things are appear in key sign. And I wanted to open that up to follow on from the parking signs with this new 2-column weighting restriction sign that you can produce now to the TSRGD, and show you how that works in key sign. I'll go through one or two other things in key signs, such as Scottish accents and their coloured destinations. I might mention the fact there was a few things that were being discussed as part of the consultation that didn't happen. And then I was going to go across to key lines to show you one or two of the changes to do with the road marking side of things, and especially one or two of the savings, as in cost savings, that can be found with the new TSRGD. So that's the basic agenda for this webinar. So let's, without further ado, move on to the first of those items. So we've all been looking at bits of TSRGD 2016, and one of the main things that I noticed when I opened it was a huge reduction in the number of regulations and directions. In 2002, there's 58 regulations at the beginning and 59 directions at the back. But when we look at the 2016, there's only 15 regulations at the front and 14 directions at the back. And I do know, obviously, they wanted to simplify things, but I was quite shocked at that. I thought that was a bit of an oversimplification. But once you start looking at the document, you quickly realise a few other things have happened as well. The next thing I was going to mention was within the TSRGD, there's a lot of amendments that have been brought together into one document. Since 2002, there's been quite a few amendment regulations. As you can see there, they're all listed together. But there is also some fire and ambulance, not very clear there, but there is also some other legislation as well that's been brought into the TSRGD, which is just a small green table on the left there.
Yep. I should just mention actually this point, I had intended to already, but there is a document that DfT have been working on. They had intended that it would be out in time for the regs when they came into force. But the machinations of government are such that it hasn't quite become available yet. And the list that Alan has just popped up there in that small green table will be included in that document, we understand.
Yes. So yes, that one was actually taken from last year's document that's still online. So I haven't broken any secrets there.
Well, we have had good feedback from the DfT about the content of that document, which is really all about the changes. One of the questions that's just been asked is there a list of the diagram numbers that have changed?
Yep.
And I believe that there is some detail going to come about that, but it's particularly focused on the changes to TSRGD overall to give people a good way into the new document.
Yes, just a bit more on the diagram numbers before I start talking about what I've got on the PowerPoint slide. there isn't a great deal of signs that have been revoked out of the TSRGD, but actually quite a few diagram numbers seem to have disappeared, and it's mainly on the plate side of it. Like most of the roundels and triangles still seem to be there with diagram numbers, but when you come down to do the plates underneath, they tend to be more of a variant or text that you're allowed to put underneath as part of the building block approach, and therefore, because they're part of the building block approach, those diagram numbers no longer exist. And I'm going to show you that with the weighting restrictions. Beforehand, in 2002, there was a lot of weighting restrictions with diagram numbers, and now it's all building block approach. So those diagram numbers have sort of disappeared, even though you can still create the signs. So, so where did the regulations and directions go? If I'm bringing back to the fact that all the regulations and directions seem to have disappeared. The intention was to simplify things and to remove a lot of the regulations and the directions and put them into advice. So obviously we've already got quite a lot of advice in the traffic signs manuals, and they are going to be updating some of these traffic sign manuals to over the next year or so to conform to the new TSRGD. But because that advice is in there, it doesn't need to be stated in the regulations and directions. So a lot of that has gone over to the traffic signs manuals. However, the rest of the regulations and directions have been put into each schedule. So where you'll find the tables, and we use this menu approach with the tables, just before the start of the tables there'll be a number of paragraphs. And these tend to be the directions or regulations that would have been at the front and back of the TSRGD, but they've now been brought closer to the signs that you're looking at. In theory, so that there's less flicking back and forwards. There's still a few pages to flick back and forwards, but it's not a full flick all the way to the front and then all the way back to the back of the document. I'll just click hold, there we go. Right, so the tabular system's been used for quite a few things, and I wanted to mention the fact that this has been used with the weighting restriction signs. And when you go to Schedule 4, which talks about upright signs that control weighting and loading, you'll just see a blank yellow and a blank white rectangle. And then underneath there, there'll be various different tables showing you the symbols and text that you can use within there. So what I wanted to do was work through an example of how you apply those tables when you come to use the TSRGD. So there's a sign that I've got on the screen now. It's a restricted parking zone with no waiting Monday to Saturday down the top. There's a loading ban as well. Those are times that are listed on there. And there's also a pay and display with a maximum stay of 2 hours during the 9 AM to 4 PM periods of those. So can that sign be put together using the new TSRGD tables? So first thing I would need to think about is, can we actually do a restricted parking zone sign above a no loading, above a pay and display type sign? So we'll look at the different tables. The Schedule 4 has these different tables, and within item 2, sorry, the text is a little bit smaller than I'd like there, but a panel that would otherwise be a single sign in accordance with the schedule may instead form part of a sign made up of at least 2 panels, where each of the panels would otherwise be a single sign. So basically, it's saying if you can do a single sign, if I can do a single low loading sign, I can put them together into that column. So that does clearly state that I can put the 3 signs together.
One of the things I drew out of the schedule here, which you see the reference, although the text is a little bit small, Schedule 4, worth writing that down if you've got a copy or for when you have a copy. What I drew out of that last week was that there was a stipulation that you can't put a white above a yellow.
That's exactly where I was going to.
Okay.
Paragraph 23, parts 1 to 7. It says the panels may be placed in any combination vertically or horizontally, subject to paragraphs 3 to 7. And it says no more than 2 panels horizontally. So that to me means no more than 2 columns. Where panels are placed vertically, they should be of the same width. So that's why the loading sign in the middle is as wide as the restricted parking zone sign at the top. No white panel may be placed above a yellow panel. So that suggests that the restricted parking zone has to be at the top. It's funny how the words always seem to be the other way around. I always think yellow goes at the top. The actual direction says no white can be placed above the yellow. It says they must all be essentially it's a restriction there, isn't it? So it's
a negative saying it mustn't be above.
Yes. Right, so now I know I can do that type of sign, and then I have to go and look through the different bits and pieces so I know how to put the elements within the sign. So let's start with the top part of the sign. So we know the first step was to just say, can we do that type of sign? Now we can say, how do we put the bits on the top part of the sign? So in Schedule 4 Part 3, there are some symbols we can put on, and item 4 in there is that no weighting roundel at 125 millimetres. It's that size because this item is to do with the restricted parking zone or pedestrian zone type of signs. And of course there is a legend mentioned in column 4 there that says you can put that text on there as well, so I can put the text on the sign as well. And then underneath there, it says I can also put a time period on that sign. So if I put Monday to Saturday, 6 till 9 and 4 till 7, there's my times on that sign. So I've now created that top sign just by going through the various parts of item 4 on part 3 of this. So now I can move on to the second sign underneath. This one's the middle no loading sign. So again, I have to now go to another part of the table, Schedule 4 Part 4 again. In this case, item 1 says that there's a loading is prohibited, but there's no symbol that's used. In column 4, required legends. You can have no loading, which it says there, and you're also required to have a time period. So, and you can see that I put the time period on the sign, and that's the sign made up. There is don't have to jump to any other ones for the loading. The loading's quite straightforward there. When I look at that without too much, I can get the sign that I want. So let's move on now to step 4. Which is the bottom part of the sign. There's a few more paragraphs and items that you need to look through on this. So first thing I need to think about is on the bottom of the sign, I'm going to have a P symbol and a car symbol. And you can see the P symbol is in item 2 to do with parking places, and it shows a minimum 75 and maximum 200. But when it comes to the car, it's not in Schedule 4 Part 4, it's in Schedule 4 Part 5, item 2. And that shows you can put a car between 45 millimetres and 120 millimetres. Now we've got the two symbols there, we now start thinking about some of the other text on the sign. I'd like to put time period up there. Again, we go back to the first item where we put the P on the sign. It says a time period may be included. So that covers that. I'll put the times on there. Underneath there, of course, there's quite a bit more text. It's a pay at machine, display ticket, and maximum stay 2 hours. So first of all, I'll mention the maximum stay 2 hours. Underneath where it mentions a time period may be included, it also said a permitted parking expression may be included, which is the maximum stay 2 hours. And then further down in item 7, it says permitted variants of item 2 apply, such as pay at machine, and any combination of the following. So I can have any of those other combinations underneath. And of course, item F of that item 2 is a display ticket. So hopefully that means I've got pay at machine, display ticket, a parking expression, which means maximum stay 2 hours. All those can be included on that bottom sign. So now I know that bottom sign is fine according to the TSRGD. So a few steps there, but as you can imagine with that bottom section, there's quite a few different items on it. But there you are, they're all covered by the TSRGD. No diagram number, just this building block approach.
It was interesting that in the previous slide, actually, it showed the P symbol and that particular row which said the required legend with no loading. There was no image there because it's so flexible. So rather than actually show, which was the approach in the last TSRGD, an example with some example time ranges there, they've chosen not to put that in at this point. So that was, there's no symbol for the loading part. On the previous slide. Don't worry too much about it.
Okay. So the only other thing I was going to mention on that was a lot of these symbol sizes just seem to mention minimum and maximum, and they're all in millimetres. And I know when we do the sign design in key sign, we tend to use stroke width. But that sort of information, again, is taken out of the TSRGD, and you'll find that in the traffic signs manuals. So which size symbol goes with which size no weighting and which size text, that is all sort of part of Chapter 7, part of the other chapters of the traffic signs manual.
As I mentioned last week, the biggest consequential changes of TSRGD on the traffic signs manual will be on chapter 3 with the parking and regulatory signs.
Okay, so hopefully that gave you a good example of how you use the building block approach to create some waiting restriction signs. Last week in part 1, Will mentioned the building block approach of warning with plates underneath and regulatory with plates underneath, but it's used in other things. The entrance to pedestrian zones, that just shows a blank 2 white rectangles. The red route signs are now prescribed, but again, there's blank white bits on there, so with various different tables underneath saying what you can include in those different parts of the sign. So those building block approaches, when I first look at them, I think, oh, that's something new. It's quite confusing. But if you think about it, we've been using the building block approach for direction signs for years. We only had a few examples in the TSRGD 2002 of direction signs, and we relied on Chapter 2 to produce direction signing. Now it's perhaps been made more formal with the building block approach actually looking like blank direction signs in the TSRGD 2016, and it hasn't really changed anything. It's just it's looking more like the way we do things in the past. Okay, so the next thing I wanted to go was actually move away from the PowerPoint slide. It's great having bits popping up on your screen, but I actually wanted to show you bits in KeySign. And for this, I'm going to show you the image that I've got up there is one for a multi-parking plate type of sign, where it's in 2 columns. And I've got the text in the middle there, talks about these things with more than 2 panels, maybe placed horizontally, i.e. you can have 2 columns. And then it talks about the need to align the widths, but not the horizontal heights, which is why it looks to have that funny shape and step in there. So let me go across to KeySign now to show you how I would do this in KeySign. So if I go across on here and I pick this one on there, hopefully that is popping up on KeySign now. So in blue piece of format, there's one I've done already, but that was just to show you what I'm aiming for. So so if I just push that upwards slightly, I've got some blank signs that I've created already on the screen. So I would have created these using just the normal design tool for auto parking. And I've got waiting restriction sign pointing to the left, a waiting restriction sign pointing to the right, a loading sign pointing to the left. And the one sign that's missing there is that limited waiting sign here to the right. So I will go into here to just create that using auto parking. Go across, so you'll notice that there's, if I'm pushing the slider across there's quite a few different templates of sign layouts. And the limited waiting one, there's the limited waiting one. I'll put in a sign reference there. I'll pick draw and pick a point on the screen. Obviously, I would have changed the times. Hopefully, yes, perhaps I should have changed the times beforehand on that one and put them a more sensible time. So I'll pick finish. I don't need the details of this because it's going to be used in another sign. And I'll move that across slightly out the way just so that for clarity away from the other sign. It hasn't highlighted that. Yeah, it's glowing blue, but it was blue in the first place, so that's why I couldn't tell. Yes. So ignoring the times that I typed on there, if I want to include this now, all these 4 signs now into a multi-parking sign, I would erase the borders off and then go into the routine that would do a combined border. Just before I do that, I also wanted to mention the arrows underneath. These arrows are actually centered underneath here, and just in case you decide to put a right arrow on, and when you select the object, the arrow turns up on the right there, there is an option that you may not see if you do things too quickly. You go and pick the right turn arrow off the menu, and the first thing it always asks for is to select objects. But down at the bottom of my screen, if I'm reading the text, it says select the sign objects or press return for manual or underneath. So if I go and press return instead of selecting the objects, I now get the option, do you want it underneath or do I want manual positioning? Of course I want the underneath option, so I'll use the underneath option. Again, it goes back to the select objects, select the objects to put the arrow with. So I'll select all the objects like that, and when I press return now, I'm hoping the arrow gets put underneath. And there we are. So that's just to show you the option for putting the arrows underneath. I'm now ready to put this into a combined border. So all I have to do is go over to the rectangular menu and find the item that's been added to the rectangular pull down for multi-parking panel.
If I just make a point there, Alan,
Yep.
the new regulations essentially define the combination of these signs, and they give more flexibility to have sort of 4 panels and so on. Now, the routine that Alan will click on in a moment will give you that layout, will enable you to choose how the signs get put together.
Yeah.
But the important thing is to recognize that you put the content of the signs together first, and that auto parking will be able to do that for a lot of the signs for you. Now, the other thing just to say is that the spacing between things like the times and the legend no loading, effectively like a title, a header for the panel, those separations will remain the same. So the auto parking routine is still going to work for you to create the content for these multi-panel parking signs, and once you put those all together, then obviously it's the new icon you can see highlighted there that Alan will show now.
I'm sure you're used to that sort of procedure. We use that sort of procedure for the 3-stack sign and the 4-stack sign. We have the contents ready and it puts it into a combined border. In this case, it's putting in a combined border that will actually do 2 columns. So that's the one we'll pick. We'll show you the dialogue. There was a preview item of this in the 19.0 release of Keysign, but there's been 1 or 2 changes over last year where the TSRGDs allowed more flexibility, especially with this the fit contents ability. So we have got this option here where there's an arrow. If I pick that arrow that I'm highlighting on the screen there, suddenly that section has now jumped up in size and it's fit to tallest. If I pick that arrow, it goes back to fit to content. So by default, I'm hoping you probably want the smallest of the sizes, and that's set there. I'll show you 1 or 2 other options in here, but we'll show you the main way it works, as Will was suggesting. We select the contents. I've got a big button here that says select the contents. So for that part, I'll select the contents on the sign. So select all those items, and it now says I've selected those 4 items when that pops back up. So I can go and select the contents of another section, and I'll highlight all that section and press return, and now I've found 5 items for that. I'll come down to the section below there. It doesn't matter which order you pick these in, you can pick them in any order you want. So I've picked that, got 7 items, but I still haven't picked the section on the bottom left, so I'll go for the select contents on the bottom left and select those items as well. And now I've got all the 4 sections, I've got their items selected, I'm ready to pick the Create Sign button. So hopefully now if I pick the Create Sign button, you'll see that the various bits and pieces have been drawn. It's actually almost by a blink of eye these days with the speed of computers, but you can see there the borders have been drawn. The detail blocks there popped up, so in this particular case, this is one of the cases where I don't use microprismatic. There's not many where I go away from microprismatic, but we don't shine our headlamps at weight and restriction plates, so I'm quite happy for that to be non-reflective. And it's 20x height, that sounds good to me. There's the height and width for the overall height and width. Pick OK, add the details, and it's put that detail block underneath that. So Will's asking me to colour it, so if I wanted to colour that in, I'll go for the select the outer border or the detail block. So quite often when it's zoomed out like this, when I come to select, it gets the inner one. So when I'm zoomed out, I tend to go down and pick there, and say, even though I'm picking the detail block, you can see it's highlighted the whole time. So I'll press return, let that go away and colour it, and you might see 1 little issue here. For some reason, it doesn't turn the arrows black. So they will actually print black because they've been left as colour 7. So there's a slight little change, a little tweak that we have already logged in the system. But if I did want to change those to show us black on the screen, so it's worth just showing you one of the issues you might come across. All you need to do is just select the colour that you want the arrow to be. In this particular case, I've picked colour 250, and hopefully that's now changed those arrows to 250. Right, so you can see here, in this particular case, that one has created a sign where they've got the same height. So how would we do that? That would be the options on here where we would use that arrow that I mentioned before and make those expand to cover the height of the tallest part of the row.
It's quite a subtle image there. That double-headed arrow just gets a little bit larger, and it's coloured red.
Yes, it was coloured.
There's the text below saying fit to content.
So there is the text below, and it does. When it's fit to content, you can see it's slightly smaller. When it's fit to tallest, you can see it's slightly bigger. I won't create that sign now because you can see it's already created on the screen. I wanted to show you some of the other plus and minus buttons and why those come into play. So I'll just zoom, again, Blue Peter fashion. There's one that I did earlier. And in this particular case, you can see the top row, it hasn't been fitted to the tallest, so there's a little notch out there on the top. And the bottom row, I've only actually got one white loading, which is to the left. So, but you can create that again from this multi-parking panel dialog. So just to show you that happening, I might as well copy some of these items. So I'll copy the contents of these signs again. So I'll copy that, copy those bits there. I'm hoping I'm not copying the border on this. I should zoom in to see what I'm copying.
It's interesting while Alan is just mumbling away, describing what he's doing there.
I am copying
to think about how these signs would actually be constructed for you, made for you. Of course, it's a great deal easier for a manufacturer just to simply create a rectangular plate for that. Mm-hmm. It is an extra operation for them and therefore potentially extra cost to cut it out so that you get that funny stepped shape. Yeah. And particularly with this example 3 there where you've got the single white sign below. Now whether of course you're actually going to ask for it to be on a grey backing board and just have it as a simple rectangle with grey around there or not, that's obviously down to the regulations to do with backing boards. Mm-hmm. So interesting issue there really in terms of the conversation that you'll have with your manufacturers.
Yes. Just to let you know, whilst Will's talking about things you could do, and as he said, you might want to do a complete grey backing board on that particular one, you don't actually have to combine them together. You can still do them lined up on the left like that. And because you may turn around and say, well, actually it looks a bit funny having the loading in the middle when it's actually pointing to the left. But that's the way it has to be done in the TSRGD when it's a combined sign. However, there's nothing to stop you using 2 separate signs. And you can still put those on a combined grey backing as well, which is probably one way that I would do it, and have it as 2 separate signs next to each other. That is still valid because they're separate signs in that case.
Essentially, it's, you could reference the way the directions are put on a direction sign. That all left pointing, all directions you reach by turning left would be left justified.
Yes. Yes, well, the one thing that TSRGD is doing is allowing greater flexibility. I think that's the one thing that I've picked up on when you've gone through the various schedules. The bits that have been taken out tend to be those things that, oh, but I just want to do this and I can't because of that one paragraph. Well, now you've got the flexibility to combine them together if you want to. And just to show you how we would do that with this sign here, I would go into the multi-parking panel. And in this particular case, I don't want 2 white ones on the bottom. So you'll notice there is a minus button there. So if I hit one of those minuses, you can see that it's put it together into there. And now that button has become a plus. So if I wanted to put it back, I can put it back and then I can put minuses. So I can add those. And you can do that with the yellow one on the top if you want to. So if I hit the minus on the yellow, you can see there it's gone down to 2. If I hit the plus afterwards, it went down to 1. It's gone back up to 2 again. So that's ways of altering each row. But it may be that you want to put an extra row in there. So you may want to hit this plus at the bottom, add a row of panels, and it's adding an extra row in. In fact, I can hit a minus on there, and you can see I can end up with some funny shapes. And you can even end up with what we've been nicknaming an hourglass shape, where you can have 2 at the top, 1 in the middle, and 2 at the bottom. So these funny shapes that you can produce now. In this particular case, I don't need that bottom row. I've got 2 on the top row, which is correct. I've got 1 on the second row, which is correct, but I don't want the third row, so I'll hit the minus at the bottom. That's got rid of the third row. And now I'm hoping I'm ready to select objects. So I'll just move that to the side so you can see the objects I'm about to select. So I'll select contents for the top left. Select all those items that are going in the top left. Then hopefully I can come across to the right and pick select contents. Select those items on top right. And then for the bottom plate, select contents, like that. If the second row was yellow as well, there's nothing to stop you having yet 2 rows, 3 rows of yellow, as long as the yellow is all above white. You can change that by changing it to parking. Obviously, in this case, that's not right, so we'll change that back to loading and parking bays, like that. But yes, you can soon change the colours around that way. So at this point, hopefully, I can pick Create Sign, and you can see it's putting the border together. It's a combined border, a wibbly-wobbly border, one might say. And maybe this one's number 2, and still non-reflective. Think, okay, add the details. And again, you've put the overall width and height on there. And you can see that there's the shape of the outer border, and it is very, very wibbly-wobbly there with the different bits and pieces around the outside on that. So,
yeah, I'm sure this will prompt some creativity amongst designers now, but it does allow flexibility to sign parking and waiting and loading restrictions there that have to be a little bit innovative to work with local situations.
You may spot these little arrows on here. This is quite a new thing in KeySign, but whilst we're talking about these multi-parking signs, it may be that you wanted to swap the top left sign with the top right sign. With those arrows being there, I wouldn't have thought that was a good idea, but I can pull that across. Is that right? Swapping the rows? I'm hoping that was going to swap the rows. No, it doesn't seem to want to, does it? Oh, I thought that was going to enable me to swap the rows around. Oh, it swapped the columns. You put that from, oh, yes, it does work. So completely wrong now with the left on the right and the right on the left. So I'll swap those back. So perhaps I just wasn't pulling it far enough to the left and right to swap them over there. And obviously in this case it's wrong because I've got yellow at the bottom. So I will drag the yellow and put them above the white. And you can see it swapped it over.
One thing that we've always had the philosophy for is to retain flexibility for you. Now, one or two of you may be thinking, well, okay, he's just shown something that would not meet with the regulations. But of course there is, despite the DFT's attempts to reduce special authorizations down to 0, I was looking at the web page on special authorizations, there's been quite a few of them already this year. And I think they may well feel that after the regs now they have come into force, those authorizations will drop to nothing. However, I don't think they would authorize that because it's very clearly not in the regs and it would very clearly not meet with the consistency of design nationally. But that flexibility that we've always built into KeySign essentially enables you to, again, be innovative with your designs, to take them to the DFT with the good case that you will have for those seeking special authorization for those signs. And it's that flexibility that we want to continue to support. So it does put the onus a little bit on you to make sure that the signs that you put up are meeting with the regulations. But rather than be very heavily prescriptive and tell you that you can't do things, then preventing you from doing any kind of innovative designs and getting special authorization for you, you can see that we actually enable that there. I mean, the other thing is that we have to be very, very careful if we stop you doing various things that they are absolutely not permitted in any circumstances or never will be. So we do prefer to keep things open for you.
Right. One of the good points about this is if you spot somebody doing something wrong, you can actually edit it and put it right quickly. So that's a real time saver as well. Because of course were on a learning curve at one point. I reckon I'm still on a learning curve. We all make mistakes, but hopefully these extra tools will help us put these mistakes right a lot quicker. Okay, so just to move on to one or two other things that are in KeySign. But before I do that, I was going to mention just a couple of little things that were being discussed over the last 18 months, 2 years, 4 years, however many long it's got. There was a suggestion that we wouldn't be using the 6-stroke width, 4-stroke width, 2.5-stroke width arms for things like crossroads and other maps. That was abandoned as part of the consultation process. There was a number of people that suggested it's quite useful to show the fact that the main road is going round to the left at this crossroads, that it's only a minor road going straight on and things like that. The flexibility that gives us to just to help shape the map symbol. So those widths are staying the same. No change on those there. What was the other thing? The other thing that I was oh yes, that was it. Somebody already mentioned diagram numbers. There was a rumour at one point that we wouldn't have any more diagram numbers. And as you can see if you look through the regulations, most of the diagram numbers have been retained. But as I mentioned earlier, the plates seem to be the one thing that's lost the diagram numbers because of the building block approach. Another thing that was going to be suggested we couldn't do anymore was that particular sign there. It's not much of a sign, I know. It tends to get used on a gantry. So if we were at the M6, the north there, the sign itself tends to sit on the front of the actual gantry underneath rather than as part of the sign face. And the intention of that was it would become combined with the destination with an underscore, which you can do. That idea has been dropped. It's still possible to do this as a separate arrow, but just to show you what the intention was, and I thought it was a good way to show off the gantry arrow. If I go here for the overhead thing, it says how many lanes. In this case, I'll put 2 arrows on. I'll go for 2 lanes. I'll put a couple of whips on there. I'll keep the excite at 300, and it says select the insertion point over the near side lane on the bottom. There we go, and I want an underline above, and he puts the underline in above there. So I'll pick where the first arrow goes, and it's put the underline above them. I can then move the destination and route number if I wanted to move those down. I suppose I could have done top to bottom, couldn't I, on that particular one? So if I go bottom to top, make sure I get the words the right way around. Bottom to top, I want to move that down to the no-go line, and it comes down to the no-go line like that. So that's how I would expect the sign to look, and that I can clearly now put in a rectangular border. I don't want a primary, I would like a motorway, so I'll go to motorway there, and change that to number 3, pick OK, add details. And you can see there that's created the type of sign that one suggestion was they would always have the arrows on the sign face and not on the gantry, but now we've got the flexibility. Again, it goes with the new TSRGD, give you the flexibility to do either situation. Just as a last point as well, just another little tip, that's actually technically not right because we need 4 stroke widths at the top of there instead of the usual 2.5. If I double click on that inner blue border, I'd like to add some extra space on the top of there. There is a manual override now available, but before you can use it, you have to say I'm going to override the normal 2.5, and I'm going to put in, actually, so it's not 4, it's an extra 2, get the numbers right, an extra 2 stroke width gap at the top of the gantry sign. And if I put a tick on there, you can see it's jumped up, take the tick away, up, down, etc., put that up. And if I pick OK, I'm hoping the height, yes, the height's jumped up as well as soon as I clicked OK. And you can see there, it's updated the design, it's updated the height and the area, and made the gantry sign look like it should do.
Obviously what you're doing there is designing a sign, and this could be in version 19, couldn't it? Those tools that you've just used are identical in terms of design, so in that was not prescribed under the regulations, it would still have been possible to do that in versions of KeySign before the regulations came into force. And that harks back, I think, to the point I made about flexibility. So just to let you know, if you have been designing gantry signs and you've got a requirement to do that, then that modify border dialog that allows you to override the DFT standards there is available.
Double click on the inner border. The blue bit is a bit that we want the extra padding in, so we double clicked on the inner, and there's that override tick. And there is all these other options for, again, more flexibility we're putting in KeySign to put other spaces in, but the useful one is for the gantry sign, because even I didn't remember the exact number of stroke widths. All I have to do is put a tick on there. So I know time's getting on, so I should really move on to some other things. I was going to show the fact that there's quite a lot of extra signs been added in the TSRGD. Even some symbols have been changed, obviously Highways England rather than an Highways Agency these days. I was just going to show you they're all included in the latest update to KeySign. Again, obviously with a lot of these cases, you would look through here, you can see there's the B one. If I go to the next page, you might see there's the D and the E one. Various different signs in the library. If you know the diagram number, one of the easiest things to do is to use the other item, which allows you to type a diagram number. In fact, I remember to type the command for this because it's easy. If I want a sign, type sign and then type in the diagram number. So if I wanted a diagram number 512, I'd type in 512. And hopefully that would go off to the library. I've got a spinning circle now while it's doing something. It's having a little think at the moment. So pick an insertion point, and hopefully you can see the 512 has been found. Another little tip on here, sometimes there's that many variations. I've typed the command to sign, and I wanted, which diagram number was, it was one of the variations of the 512 that I wanted, but I can never remember which. So what you could say 0.4567 or whatever. Quite often what I would do, I just put 512X, and it says, oh, there isn't a 512X, but it would give you a list of 512s that are in the library. So if I wanted the 0.1 and the right version of that, I'd pick that, and hopefully that would bring that in with there. So it's just a little tip there. If you're wondering what variation to use, just put an X in or something that doesn't exist, and it will come up with different options. So now I wanted to move forward on to a few other little things that have changed in the TSRGD. And these two things are for Scotland, so I know the rest of us in England can sit back and say, oh, we don't have to worry about this, but there's a couple of changes that have happened in Scotland. One thing, throughout Scotland, the use of these speed limit countdown signs is prescribed, and we've now added those in. So if I go over to, I'm trying to remember which of these menus this is in now, perhaps I should have typed in the down. Oh, that's the problem with the image. It's a green. They should have had a nice little image on there, but that's the speed countdown. It comes just after the other countdown symbols. So when you pick that item, this should pop up, and you can choose a motorway sign or a non-primary sign. You can choose the 3, 2, 1 bar. So I wanted motorway, and I wanted this for 300 yards, and it happens to be it's coming down to 40 mile an hour at the end of the motorway. I'll choose 40, pick OK. It's not actually including the TSRGD, but it's been given special authorisation for Scotland. So there's just a quick reminder. I know some other authorities have got authorisation as well. And then I'll pick an insertion point, and hopefully that has brought in the 40 mile an hour with the motorway background with 3 bars on there. So that was just an item that's been added in for those type of countdown signs. The next thing I wanted to mention was within the TSRGD, you may have seen yellow text. These images are from Google, so I've zoomed in there. They're not as clear as you might hope for, but you can see there's even an accent on that I for Port Rye, is that? Rye, yes. And there is green text. Now this doesn't show up so well on that image, but when I saw them on my screen originally, I thought the green was better than that. Just have a look on there. You might see that the text here, which is Medhan, is actually a green lettering.
So it's the Gaelic that's green there.
Yes, whereas the village centre is in black letters, whereas the first 2 lines, Meaden Bale.
Yeah, and
Meaden
Bale actually. Bale is the Irish for Dublin, which is basically town.
So, so obviously we've got to do some changes. Obviously, changing to yellow and green is quite an easy thing using AutoCAD colours. But it may be that we want to do the accent for Port Rye there. So I will go along to the medium text, and you can type it directly. Obviously, I haven't got on my keyboard, and I'm going to pick a bit higher up so I can see what I should type. But I put a little note on my drawing, so I do a capital I. But then for the capital R, but then for the I don't know which key to use. So I would use an Alt key, an Alt 2, 3, 6, and hopefully that's put a letter I with an accent in there. GH.
Alt GR and I.
Oh, I haven't got a GR. Oh, there on the right.
GR and I.
Well, I will try that then. Alt GR and I. Oh, that's good. But it's done the other accent. Okay.
Which is not in the official alphabet in TSRGD 16. But that's a standard keyboard shortcut for, I think, Alan, you're not going to remember the 236 there. That's the code from the American Standard something, it's the ASCII code. So, and so I think it was American Standard Character or some institute or whatever.
But that was to show you can type it straight away. I suspect I wouldn't be typing it. I suspect that what I would do is this other way that I wanted to also show you, where I would type it without the accent first, and then use the button on the menu, which allows me to pick accents. And you can see here I've got different types of accents, and I've got the Scottish style and the Welsh style available as well. So in this particular case it's a grave, and it's the Scottish grave, so I'll pick OK, and I'll pick the word Rye, and then I can actually put the grave on any of the letters, but I want it on the I, so I'll pick OK. And because that was the Scottish version, you can see it's changed the text there. And even if I was to change this to real text, you'll notice that it's all as, if I go across to real text, you'll see it's coloured up. And in fact, there's an option now to change that accent to a Welsh version. And you can see if I do click Welsh, you can see the Welsh graph. I know that's unfortunately that's using a weird Windows font. For some reason, the G doesn't seem to line up with that. But the eyes drop down. But
it's only a representation.
Yes, what you can see is the actual traffic text in the drawing is changing between the Scottish form of the graph and the Welsh form of the graph, which is an interesting little addition to change things around.
So there's some fairly late amendments to the shape of that graph accent, which occurred quite late on in the draft of the TSRGD 16. So obviously that form is slightly different, but that's what the Scottish Office required of the regulations.
Right, okay. What's the time do we go? Keep going, Paul says keep going, right. So what I wanted to do next was actually flick across to key lines, just to show you a couple of other things in key lines.
We've just got a couple of questions. I think we'll probably come to a Q&A session at the end, because we've gone over the hour now, but I think Alan's still got some things that will be of interest. Yeah. For those who do have to duck out and go to meetings and the like, do remember that the webinar is being recorded. So but I think, yeah, Alan, you've still got some things which I'm sure people will find of interest. And there's a couple of questions that have come in there, and I think we may, we'll just leave those to the end, so people who do have a bit of time, I will make sure that from now, any questions that come in, I will make sure that we answer them offline after the webinar is finished.
Yeah. So I know politically, there's been a lot of talk about these traffic regulations reducing sign clutter and making the number of signs out there a lot less. So I wanted to just talk over one or two of the changes which you might be able to save a little bit of money. In this particular case, I've got an electric vehicle charging point where we've created a lay-by into the pavement. And one of the things that's changed with the new TSRGD is the need to put markings with the actual sign. So this is a valid bay because it's curbed as a bay. That is perfectly fine. There's no reason to have the road marking as well as the sign. You can see exactly where the electric point is because of the way the curve goes. There's no reason to have extra markings added in there. And similarly, another example of this that's mentioned in the circular and TSRGD is the fact that a loading only bay, once you've put the marking down that says loading only like that, do you really need another sign up on a pole saying loading only? So in this particular case, that's still legal and valid. There's no sign there saying loading only, just the marking, but that's legal and valid. Another thing that might help us, perhaps not so much on cost savings, but the double yellow lines no longer need to have the end blips. So obviously by default, you'd probably expect to continue having those. So there, I've just used the key lines command to add those end blips on there. You don't need to have those in there as part of the TSRGD. I know a lot of people were getting let off tickets because of bits that were missing, and therefore they didn't have a bar on the end and things like that, little breaks or dropped curbs which didn't have bars on the end and all sorts of things. Now it doesn't need to have the bar on the end. So technically, I suppose that means that we don't need to have any bars. So I'm going to get rid of the one off that end. I'm going to get rid of the one off that end, and I've got rid of them away like that. So if you do want to if you use key lines and you want to get rid of the bars, so there is that button on the menu. That if I pick again, it puts it back on. If I pick again, it takes it away. I suppose that means actually we don't need to do any end bars whatsoever. We could always do double yellow lines like that. Not necessarily so, especially with a single yellow line. You may have on one side a all-day restriction, and you may have on the other side a just a peak hour restriction. And you've got to use that bar to show where the restriction changes. So there is still a need to have those end bars where a restriction might change from one point to another, but it's still a single yellow line.
I think if I could just add, they've relaxed the requirement there so that people can't get off parking tickets if they happen to to be absent due to works, temporary reinstatement, or for whatever reason that they are missing. But personally, I think one would always use them. It's a nice tidy mark. Maybe I'm just a traditionalist that way. But do be aware that just because they're relaxed...
I'd have to say I wouldn't be rushing to take them away. They look half finished when I look at those. But
so just be aware that just because they're relaxing the requirements to put these things in isn't really a carte blanche to do without them. And that would apply with the relaxation for repeater signs, for two terminal signs and for speed limits and those sorts of things.
Another thing that's changed is that as well as not when the bay's clearly marked, or formed by the curbing, you don't need to have the markings there, you can just have the signs. You're also allowed to have contrasting surface as a marking. So it says the bay marking is either a dash line or a contrasting surface. So if this happened to be some nice textured paving and you created the disabled bay in some nice textured paving there, you don't need to have the marking around the outside to also show where the disabled bay is. Just the sign on the pole would be sufficient. I know from a maintenance point of view, these white lines wear out quite quickly, so they can actually cost more than the sign. So in this particular case, by using a special, obvious enhanced paving and a sign, that would probably not need maintenance for some years, whereas the white line would probably need maintenance quite regular intervals.
And again, it's that flexibility that local authorities have to make their mind up about those kind of decisions.
There is one other change, it's to do with shared use bays, and mainly to do with taxi ranks. So I'll just to show you creating a bay. In this case, I'll use a permit holder's bay, and I'll pick the curb line and say I want the permit holder's bay to there, and put it on this side of the curb. And I've got various things like car club, electric vehicle. I won't bother putting any text on this because it's a shared use one. It's obviously it's going to be used for a taxi rank. Did I pick the wrong one?
Picked other there.
Yeah, I picked other there, which allowed me to type one. So I could have typed in Alan's Bay, actually, on that point. But there's the bay that's been created. In this case, I want to use it for taxi at some time and other things at other times. So you wouldn't put any text on there, but what you would do for the taxi rank is to put a yellow line through it. So I'm just double-clicking on this. Various options popping up on there. The top option on there is add a no stopping line, and you put a tick on that, and then pick OK. And you can see as soon as I put a tick on there, it's now got a yellow line included through. So it's a white bay with a yellow line through it, but that's actually a no stopping line. It's a 200 wide line. So you can see there it's quite wide, 200 wide line. And that would be used for a taxi rank for some of the time, and maybe a permit holder's bay or a limited waiting bay for some of the time as well.
I think it's a good opportunity just to mention that Alan's showing this in version 7.3. Now there are some fairly limited changes that are that we've had to build into the new version of Keyline, so that isn't quite out yet, actually. Yeah. So we're going through the very final testing stages of that. So Alan is showing this in 7.3, and I thought if you could just double-click and bring up the properties of the feature options dialog again. Now, it was very wide, and I'm sure some of you probably noticed that.
Yeah.
So it is something that you can resize, and it will remember its size more effectively and its position than before. So he's just clicked OK to get rid of it, and double-click to bring it back, and you can see it's come back in its narrower form. So that's an interesting point, really. I'm sure some of you will have noticed, and he's gone all the way over to the right-hand side to find that click. Most of you probably will make it in its nice slim mode, not in the wide mode that Alan...
I think that was just me. When I opened it first, I thought, oh, the text isn't displayed there, so I pulled out the right-hand side, and it didn't widen that text, and I think that was the only reason.
So just actually, if you can bring that up, because I was going to make a point about that, as well as the release roadmap for version 7.3, which is very much imminent. As you can see, it looks a lot more like a kind of standardized property grid, or indeed AutoCAD's Properties Manager property grid. So we're able to add some data to this. That's something we're working on in the background, and you can see it's a little bit more intelligent. So I think if you put into a particular value, if you click into a particular value,
so if I wanted to pick into this one,
then you can see we get an up-down control up here, and it will have a sensible approach to the increments in there. So we're doing a lot more with that. We put date controls if you want to record the date that something's been laid and so on, and tick boxes, and that's actually reacting directly. There is an immediate update happening, even though there isn't a tick box in the immediate update. Some of the more complex markings, like whole zebra crossings, for example, do take a few seconds to update. So although we do get an immediate update, even though the tick isn't put in that box labelled immediate update, it's quick enough to be able to do that anyway.
Yeah, there's like a half-second delay on there without the immediate update. If I put a tick on immediate update, hopefully you can see straight away as soon as I change that number.
But you find that it will take quite a while to react with the more complicated markings, like whole zebra crossings with all the zigzags and so on. So I just wanted to make that point, and really it was my lead into making sure people are aware of the fact that we're just about to release 7.3, which will be the latest version compliant with the new regs.
Right, well, only a couple other little things that are available. You've been able to do this all along as well. There's been an issue over yellow boxes only having 4 sides, and there seems to have been a mismatch in 2002 and Chapter 5, where Chapter 5 suggested you always have 90-degree diagonals and you always have 4 sides, but the TSRGD didn't. In 2016, the TSRGD now allows you to definitely have any shape box that you require and any shape diagonals. In Keylines, we've been able to do this. We've got an item on here that will allow us to draw more than 4-sided yellow boxes, and it'll even allow you to define the manual diagonals. So I can I'll draw a 5-sided yellow box there, hopefully, and I want one of the diagonals going from there to there, and I want the other diagonal going from, make sure it's not 90 degrees, just to show you, like that. So that ability's been there in Keylines, but now it's actually been formalised in the TSRGD.
So it should make these things a lot easier to lay. I think the DFT said if it looks like a duck and it smells like a duck, sorry, if it looks like a yellow box junction and it smells like a yellow box junction, it's a yellow box junction. Yeah. And the public understand what they look like, so there wasn't such a heavy requirement.
Again, I think I'm quite pleased because there's been people that have been getting off on very small technicalities on these type of markings of signs, and I'm quite pleased that we're taking these small technicalities away. Just one other thing that's been added in, the yellow bar, roundabout bars, we've all been using them for years, but I didn't realise they weren't formally prescribed, and they're now formally prescribed in the TSRGD. So if I wanted some yellow roundabout bars, I'll do slip road type because this is coming up to the roundabout. So I'll pick the centre of the slip road there, and I'll pick the 2 sides of the slip road, and there we go. They've popped them all along the spacing. This particular case, my slip road's not long enough. I only managed to get up to bar 42, and then you'd need more than 250 metres of slip road to get to bar 45. So that was just a couple of other little things that's been changed on the road marking side. So I'm hoping that has shown you quite 1 or 2 things. And at that point, I think that's probably far enough. I've got 1 or 2 other little issues. But
well, let's just have a look at that last slide of issues,
yeah.
Because it may be that as we turn our attention to a Q&A session and perhaps call a formal close, that there might be some things on there that people do find of interest to talk to us about. So perhaps as a prompt for a Q&A session.
Right, so I've gone, I'm just going to share that across now. I've gone over to the right slide. And whilst we're talking about the fact that parking bays you can have lines and signs omitted, there's one other thing I didn't mention actually. TROs are not needed for a few more of these signs and lines. Cycle lanes, you don't need to have a TRO anymore. School zigzags, I know we've all been doing no stopping orders for quite a few years now. No need to do a no stopping order for a school zigzag anymore. And actually, that's probably quite significant in cost savings because I'm sure going to solicitors, getting the TRO advertised and created is quite a costly part of the process. So I'm quite pleased that will save some money and a bit of effort as well. And there's an interesting one as well with no entry except cycles. More likely on a one-way road where you may be wanting to allow cycles the other way. Obviously, if you put except cycles under the no entry, then effectively cycles can go down there even if the TRO says they can't. So now we don't have to exempt them from the TRO. We can still do a one-way street, but as long as we put no entry except cycles up the other end, cycles can go the other way down.
You've got no illumination there as well, but you're mentioning the TROs in relation to those signing.
The illumination at the top there was to do with what you mentioned last week. You were talking about the amount of signs that no longer require illumination and the costs that were involved. I know Will mentioned that last week.
You're saying the TROs.
Traffic regulation orders.
Yeah, at the bottom bullet point there, I was looking at the safety cycle sign. No, that was my mistake there for reading the text wrong. We've just
safety critical signs. Critical signs, yeah.
We just had a question in actually. Can we confirm that double yellow lines don't need TROs?
Oh, I read that. That's a good point. Sorry, yes. I'll have to go away and have a double check on that. But I'm fairly certain I read somewhere that it was a response from the consultation. It was that said they were going to...
So let's answer that offline, because I think probably what we'll find is that we're looking for something that isn't there. So in the 2002 regs, it would say something about the Highways Act, which I believe is the one that mentions that it's effectively the reference that requires TROs for double yellow lines. And of course, if that is relaxed, then that won't be mentioned in that context. So very, very good question. The thing I started with, just to summarize last week's webinar, was in response to questions, and if you can allow me to take that offline and answer directly, then we'll do our best to find where that is specifically, the relaxation for double yellow lines not needing TROs. Another question that's just come in, but before I answer that, I think, I would probably, I don't know if you've got a Q&A slide there, but we're sort of moving into Q&A for the webinar.
Probably worth going on to that. I just have a quick little, before we go on to the few more questions, lots and lots of little things have been changed as well, such as match day and event day are now officially time periods. The road marking for speed limit roundels at 1065, that can actually be classed as a repeater sign. Temporary signs needing a remove by date on the back, that's now written into the TSRGD. A 1010 can now extend a cycle lane across a junction, so if you wanted to do some dash lines across the junction, 1010 is now allowed for that. And a few other little things that you can read off yourself on that PowerPoint slide. The bottom one then, imperial only, is no longer authorised. So somebody asked, has the diagram numbers been removed or revoked? The imperial only height restriction signs have been removed from the regulations. Obviously the existing ones there, they've got a lifetime authorisation because they were done with the existing TSRGD, a lifetime saving as they called. But from now on, it's got to be both units on the signs.
Okay, well, thanks very much for taking the time to attend this webinar. The second part of a series of 2 focused very much on TSRGD, and we hope to see you again soon.